Shut up! Will you shut up? Ah, now we see the violence inherent in the system. Shut up! Oh, come and see the violence inherent in the system! Help! Help! I'm being repressed! Bloody peasant! Oh, what a giveaway. Did you hear that? Did you hear that, eh? That's what I'm on about. Did you see him repressing me? You saw it, didn't you?
The Atheism Plus forum, as we know, withholds comments submitted, at least in some sections of the forum, until approved by moderators. Well, the moderators rejected my first and only contribution to the discussion. And what were the grounds for the dismissal of my comment from such a discriminating forum? Well, when you sign up, of course, you must agree to certain conditions, which I did, but those refer not only to the conditions whereby your post will be approved by moderators, but also the conditions by which you may be banned. I have not been banned, as yet, as far as I know. Note, however, the later condition which warns you that Atheism Plus have the right, Atheism Plus have the right to remove, edit, move, or close any topic at any time should we see fit. So moderators seeing fit would be one of the unenumerated rights, which pretty much make all other conditions subject to moderator fancy. But I'm focusing, you see, on the enumerated rights, so to say. The further conditions you must satisfy in order to get your post approved are mentioned in not just one but two threads in the main header of the forum section called simply Atheism Plus, to which I posted. The earlier post from August 27 is entitled Main Forum Rules and gives a very brief, vague mention regarding the intent of the moderators to move or redirect, not delete your posts. So I'll skip it as irrelevant. My post was rejected, not moved or redirected. The thread which was posted the next day on August 28th and entitled merely Forum Rules rather than Main Forum Rules lays out a further set of rules which addresses the conditions for approving posts, though those also appear to affect banning procedures. Note that at the very end of this list, Rule 0, that again entitles moderators to yet another bit of arbitrary rules lawyering, stipulated as, these rules are general guidelines and are very flexible. And here again, there is the declaration of intent to do as we see fit regarding the posts of participants. And we're left with a moderator-participant relationship on the forum in which the moderators have all the privileges, the participants none. So, putting aside that they've already declared that your posts are subject to their whims, at the conclusion of those three sections we can delineate these specific violations that will ultimately be the only explicitly delineated grounds for your post being rejected. Abusiveness, obscenity, vulgarity, slander, hate, threats, sexual orientatedness, illegality, harassment, insulting, nastiness, that's an interesting one, importing discussions from other forums, note that one for later, failing to hide text that might trigger flashbacks and panic attacks from some people, use of malware, topic derailing, and this one is precious, disobeying or otherwise annoying moderators, posting personal information about others, and creating sock puppets, like that disobedient and annoying Matt Dillahunty. Well, after entering my first and only contribution to the forum, I received a letter to my email account stating this: the following reason was given for the disapproval. The reported message does not fit into any other category. Please use the further information field. Use the further information field. Right, I had and still have no idea to what they're referring here. I did post my comments in the correct entry field and in the forum thread for which it was intended, but from this alone I might even consider that perhaps I did make some sort of technical error in how I clicked the enter button or something. But then there came this extra bit of clarification as to why my post was rejected. Mansplaining is not welcome, especially not on a topic like this. Thanks, the management. So apparently my first and only comment was rejected due to the offense of mansplaining. First of all, I have to pause a moment just to reflect on this, because I've never found this condition established as an actual official forum guideline anywhere else ever before. Only there on the Atheism Plus forum. No mansplaining. That was the specified offense in the email. But, as I just showed, the rules don't include no mansplaining anywhere. Nowhere, in fact, does the forum state this as a guideline. It is not listed, or rule, and no clever interpretation, as they put it, can suffice to tease out one of those guidelines, some vague reference to mansplaining specifically. It's just not there. The closest one comes would be the arbitrary right assumed by moderators to take offense and to carte blanche treat anything as a violation as they damn well please. But mansplaining is not a stipulated offense. In other words, to use mansplaining as a cause for comment deletion is at best an arbitrary rationalization. And thus, I'm a mansplainer. It's official and everything. The management, both words capitalized naturally, deems it so. And mansplaining is clearly something egregious, whatever it actually is, and mind you, it wasn't followed by further explication. The term mansplained is a thoroughly feminist theory term. In other words, mansplained is a term that must be femsplained. One simply doesn't hear this term outside of feminist circles, out in the real adult world at large, where, you know, people speak human. Well, when they're not speaking of women as bitches, of course, which likely is the other side of the same coin. So what I mean is that mansplaining is a term that you simply don't hear with that fine line of mature people who just talk people talk with each other. On that fine line, people don't tell each other dismissively that they're mansplaining, or femsplaining for that matter, just that they agree or disagree with a specific point and why. Though the Atheism Plus so-called movement would surely change that to make it a household word. What an achievement. Now, this term mansplaining, I confess further, is one I started to use myself on occasion ever since I first heard the term last year during the initial elevator gate infighting. You see, I didn't actually understand how it was intended to be used by the milieu from which it derives, and I decided to attribute the most sophisticated, most charitable definition I could to it. And I considered it to work and included it in my own vocabulary. But presumptuousness is not close to godliness, or perhaps it is. But having been presumptuous about the definition of the term mansplaining, and now having experienced a more obnoxious utilization of the term upon myself, I feel a bit like one who has just unwittingly dined with a cannibal. What I presumed was the correct application for the term mansplained was this: an explanation provided by a man that demonstrated a flagrant disregard or ignorance of a woman's underlying interests, natural response, or explicit intent, or something like that. For instance, a pregnant woman tells her boyfriend that she's going to get an abortion, that she's thought about it and simply has chosen not to have the child, at least at this time. The boyfriend then goes on and on about how he thinks the zygote, a fetus, or whatever the protoplasm is at that point, is a human being with the right to be born, and how he really wants the baby and thinks it's his right to demand she bear it, and ultimately includes nothing in his reaction regarding what she just said about having chosen to get an abortion, completely disregarding her own stated position and interests in the matter. So I would have concluded that this would be a good case of mansplaining, since the boyfriend clearly was flagrantly disregarding a woman's interests and agency in her own decisions. There's even this one YouTuber who actually calls himself Mansplaination, who made a rather spirited attempt to reason with elevator girl Rebecca Watson after her traumatic near-rape incident involving a polite offer of coffee and conversation after having hung out in a bar in a foreign country's hotel with all strange guys until 4 in the morning. This was the Mansplaination in response.
I really hope that in your next video you sort of admit how much of a bitch you've been and just go, yeah, you know what, I was completely wrong. I don't see that as a likely possibility, but I'm open to that possibility.
Mansplaining. And thus I thought it an apt term at the time. But now that I have been associated with the term myself, I have to let that shirtless young man and the boyfriend off the hook. The term is clearly used in a different way, one which lumps they and I into a single camp of equivalent egregiousness. There is no dictionary definition of mansplaining, obviously. It's just not there. Webster's does not compute, but then again Webster's is part of the rhetoric of the patriarchy, you know? So, you know. But on the other hand, the Urban Dictionary online presents a number of definitions on the matter, as a slang term apparently, all different and none official. There is no official definition, only such informal attempts to define it. And that ill-defined term was used by the Atheism Plus the management to silence my comments. And really, can you imagine the Atheism Plus management adding no mansplaining explicitly to the forum rules of an atheist forum? And with that extensive introduction, I will now present the comment I offered to the Atheism Plus forum in order for you, my viewer, or perhaps viewers, to determine for yourself whether I was guilty of mansplaining, and thus whether the management was warranted in suppressing this kind of heinous speech on their delicate forum where discussion is so very heavily regulated. And this was my contribution in full, and I apologize in advance for how long it is. I have a propensity to be more thorough than perhaps I should, as this video surely demonstrates. I've also edited it slightly because I had left sentences unfinished, and I'd rather not read out any of my sloppiness, but I'll be showing the actual text itself as I read the edited version. It's only a few small instances. Prefatory, although I did think to save my comment elsewhere before posting it, having lost comments before to a misclick, and just in case, they did actually simply nix the comment, because I wasn't certain. So I did have that foresight. I did fail, however, to employ properly the recommended screen capture and other methods mentioned in the Atheism Plus Survival Guide by the criticalg, linked in the description, and also the necessary tactics mentioned by integralmath in another video.
We screen cap everything they write, and we screen cap everything we write on a timeline, and we keep it updated publicly. So the way other people can go look at the time. Yeah, there's some snark contained in something like Therongula. It's not unbiased, it does say rude things, but the information presented in it is all sourced and accurate and screen capped.
And I didn't do all that, so I have no way to prove all that I'm stating. No more than Matt Dillahunty can prove the content of his own original comment, which was deleted by an Atheism Plus forum moderator as well. But as it was my honest experience, I'm telling it anyway, even if I didn't thoroughly document everything. And one other prefatory note: no, this has nothing to do with atheism, not a whit or a whisker. Such is Atheism Plus. So onward I go. The thread the title of the thread to which I posted was this: Why can't men shut up about abortion? Now, you may be thinking that that was in reference to the boyfriend I mentioned earlier, who won't shut up about his opinion and just recognize the reality of his girlfriend's intent and say in the matter. But no, that's not it. The OP, the original post of the thread, refers to male allies shutting up about abortion. And incidentally, the thread itself violates the forum's own policy, as I mentioned earlier, which reads, keep your arguments in the threads they started in and don't import arguments from other forums. That Atheism Plus thread originates outside the Atheism Plus forum and thus could have been withheld as a violation of an explicitly stipulated forum rule. But it was allowed in, and my comment on it disallowed out. But that's neither here nor there. Or rather, it's both. Anyway, the thread had been around since September 23rd. But the last comment posted at the time I attempted to post a response on October 1st was on, so several weeks ago, was on page 9. And it went like this. What gives you the impression that anyone ever wanted the conversation to be about why men talk about abortion? The question in the title is, why will they not stop talking? And that brilliance was from where my response started. Here was my response. The title of the thread is a suggestion about men, i.e. why can't you just shut up like we'd prefer, and was asked, as if to women, wondering at what women should do about this phenomenon of men not shutting up on the subject. Men joining the struggle for safe, available abortion as participants with a voice is seen as a bad thing. Read the original post. Privileged groups, when speaking on behalf of underprivileged groups, will often usurp the discussion and make it all about them. Abortion stops being about the person having the abortion and becomes about a third party, whoever impregnated them, getting a seat at the table. This is precisely the sort of thing I knew would make the plus a minus. The primary contention, it's egregious when one ally will usurp the discussion and make it all about them. It's very simple. If you silence people who would fight, particularly those with demonstrative effectiveness for greater and better access to quality abortion services based on solely on their possession of a phallic, then you needlessly reduce the forces and assets of your fighting ranks. Not only needlessly, but stupidly on a tactical level. The anti-abortionists will applaud this move and agree that, yes, women are the only ones we'll listen to on the matter, only too happy to silence and weaken their opposition further. Not to mention how the anti-abortionists thrive by using women to voice opposition to their own legal standing on the matter. Yes, forget about all those others. Only listen to these women who've been traumatized by having an abortion. How they've suffered. Listen to them only. Really, I can only imagine the lack of perspective that would lend itself to even conceiving the issue as one requiring the silencing of male allies, much less wording it as belligerently as "shut up about it." As if men's contributions were offensive, merely because they're from men. The original post analysis couldn't stomach much further than that, fails like wagging a finger at the white freedom riders who were beaten just as senselessly as the black freedom riders, or at men who participate in abortion clinic defense against violent antis. If women insist on silencing males, they merely usurp the discussion and make it all about women. This isn't qualitatively different than men usurping the discussion to make it all about themselves. Usurping discussion isn't a sound tactic. Dominating discussion in opposition to allies isn't a sound tactic. Focusing on who gets the spotlight isn't evidence of sound tactics. Framing the struggle in terms of a competition for who gets to have the most prominent say isn't evidence of sound tactics. Addressing the attack on women's rights as a mere discussion isn't a sound tactic. Fighting effectively is. It isn't about who gets the microphone, but how to get the results. What succeeds in winning abortion services for women is all that's significant. It matters diddly whether it's a man, woman, transgender, hermaphrodite, or cyborg, so long as productive work actually is done for the establishment and advancement of safe, quality, widely available abortion services for women, and not whether it sounds like it is, but whether it actually is. The distinction is the difference between a seemingly politically correct fail and an actually tactically correct win. When it isn't just women speaking up about women's reproductive interests, but men too, this not only makes for a broader appeal, but also presents a stronger message that is shared by the whole of the species rather than a marginalizable special interest. Obviously, well, obvious to most people, the best tactics would involve a united front for both women and men. There's bound to be some who are better spokespeople, given that humanity is a heterogeneous lot. There may very well be men present in a given group of abortion defenders who are more capable of presenting and exhorting on the issue than the women present in that same group, and to insist on such men not only being neutered so that the less effective women speakers seem to look better, but also just shutting up on the matter entirely is just a pathetic confession that one has substituted pageantry for protest. It would be lame for men to insist on women shutting up if there is a woman specialist to speak on male testicular cancer, and it would be just as lame for women to insist on a male specialist in breast cancer not to speak on the subject. To make one's primary concern about which sex is doing the speaking belies an attitude more about making a show of things than accomplishing anything. Or rather, it demonstrates that one's goal is not necessarily accomplishing anything for abortion access, since a victory on that ground would end all the discussion opportunities, but rather accomplishing a preferred sex roster for all discussion panels. Not to mention that it's simply an insult to men to presume they can't speak up on the issue without making it all about themselves, or that women can't do so without insisting that it's all about them instead, though obviously this is one example of the latter here. And it isn't all about women. On the one hand, there is that little fact buried under the rubric of privilege. Women can have husbands, brothers, fathers, sons, friends, and male allies, all of whom are concerned for and share an interest in women's welfare, and have a stake in women not being forced to drive 3 states away or risk death with a coat hanger. If you think men are heartless, again you're clueless, and even if they were, the health of women important to them outweighs whatever stupidity men might assert. And if you think men are oh so anxious to get a seat at the table of abortion access protests, think again. The abortion proponent's table is not going to be the most attractive table to sit at for a man. Those who do, not so bad. It's much easier for men to just shrug it off, and generally they do. This is one of the goals of Banana Man's 180 campaign, to get people to ignore women's experience and just accept the Nazi anti-abortion position as if a moral duty. Better to win men to speaking up in defense of abortion than let men bow out and be taken up by apathy or contrary causes. The instant you make abortion an exclusively girls' thing, you lose the support of those who you would prefer to just shut up and sit listening. Abortion evidently applies only to women's bodies, but as an issue, it also involves whether or not the state will be permitted to intrude into the life and body of a citizen in such a way, for all practical purposes, to enslave them. A woman forced to bear children is legally nothing but a slave. A civil war was fought in the United States to eliminate that social status. Thus, at its fundamentals, abortion is a general question that cannot be brushed aside as just for women, and no male should feel comfortable when the state makes inroads into eroding it just because it's only pregnant women who are directly affected. If the state can do it to pregnant women on one pretext today without more opposition than some posturing female speechmakers, they'll do it to all women and men under some new pretext tomorrow. It makes no difference that it nominally involves women's reproductive organs in this case. The point is to defend one's body, life, and livelihood against the use of state power to undermine them, and no one is immune to the effects of such a loss. Even though, yes, women with an unwanted pregnancy would be the direct target on this particular front. So, on the other hand, abortion also isn't about the person having the abortion any more than it is about whoever got them pregnant. It isn't personal. It's about the human condition and what must be done about it. A modern, civilized, advanced society requires quality, accessible abortion services for women. Period. Regardless of what anyone, male or female, wishes to say about it, or how well they're able to present it in this or that venue. And we, inclusive, are willing to fight for it, even vocally. But none of that matters if the struggle itself entails nothing but territorialism about bully pulpit space for you. Which is a tad on the speechifying side, not unlike me, but mansplaining. How do you derive that from my comments? I was not making the case for men leading the abortion defense movement. The prominence of men is neither required nor demanded, though the active and vocal presence and participation of men ought be encouraged. Nor did I attempt to make the case for men getting some arbitrary equal representation at every presentation ever given on the subject of abortion. As I said, the best speaker in a given group of abortion defenders may be a man, but it may also be a woman. Not at all surprising. I wasn't even demanding for men a seat at the table, whatever that ultimately means, since we're looking at a battlefront, not a discussion roundtable. I wasn't declaring that men can articulate the same exact experience as a woman regarding abortion, and I could make that argument, but I wasn't. Nor that women's articulation about their requirement and demand of abortion access is somehow inessential on that particular front. Quite the contrary. I'm not contesting, but maintaining that women should be articulate about the subject, but also adding that men shouldn't be silenced about the subject. Nor was I making the case for men being accorded credit and respect for all they do and have done in defense of women's access to abortion services, something which can cost their lives after all, and has. But I wasn't even addressing that minor consideration. What I was arguing for was a course correction in the discussion of tactics toward a more effective feminist campaign, knowing full well that not only the precarious position that abortion access, at least in the United States, happens to be in at this present historical juncture, but also how utterly stupid it is to divide and splinter your forces during a battle in front of the enemy at all, much less when you're in a precarious position in the present historical juncture. I was arguing for maintaining the ranks and not shutting up men. And that was called mansplaining. So this charge of mansplaining, in my estimation, seems to either simply entirely miss the mark, or else the term is merely a femsplained mask for something else. What did I say that was mistaken at all, much less as a man? And really, if you can't counter an argument on its merits and have to point to the sex of the person stating it, then your effectiveness at addressing the matter at hand is conspicuously absent. Well, at least to me, since otherwise I would have been the only one to know about it. And keep in mind, the management may or may not have even known I was a man when applying the term mansplaining to me, even if in this case they were correct in the presumption. So really, mansplaining was already a problematic summary statement, and the only legitimate way to counter my argument would have been to post it and then argue against it, though you wouldn't have found an effective rebuttal to hold against the suggestion that your male allies be silenced and culled. Given the nature of my comments, mansplaining now appears to refer to such things as making strategic sense, presenting a humanist, egalitarian perspective, being inclusive and presenting a united front, thinking critically about one's anti-male propositions, thinking critically about the implications of your approach to a struggle, thinking critically at all, speaking your mind at all if you're a man, and thus mansplaining is just explaining things as they are. But from now on, I'm not going to call anything by the name mansplaining. I'm not going to reclaim it, you know. I'm not going to use it ever again, even if I may now introduce the term femsplaining to refer to this sort of discussion being exacted through the methodology of so-called Atheism Plus. there is a mediating element to the position articulated in the original post of that thread, something I didn't mention in my comments. It goes like this. I agree, given the political climate and importance of reproductive rights, this is an argument men can't be silent on. How foresighted and thoughtful of this Julian to recognize that. But, and then he, and it apparently is a he, followed up with the comment I read earlier about usurping discussion. And it should be of no surprise to find that this Julian's signature comment is this. Giuliano, the emasculator, does not sleep. To do so would waste valuable time he could be spending berating men over their unwillingness to be agents of the matriarchy. And it's just very humorous, I'm laughing. So the call, it's funny for some people, you might think, so the call for men to shut up about abortion, not coincidentally, comes from just such an Atheism Pluser who espouses tirelessly berating men, particularly those resistant to, I won't say feminism, just noting. A further expounding on and fleshing out of the theme of not entirely silencing men was on page 1 of that same thread. This comment from a moderator called On a Mission 5. I, for one, don't want pro-choice men to shut up about abortion. A very promising sign. Providing, I knew she'd change, they are countering anti-choice men and not speaking over me, telling me what I think. Pressing concern about male allies on the matter, apparently. What I would like is for my seat at the table, as the person whose reproductive rights and bodily autonomy are at stake, to be the one that is of major importance, to have my voice be the one which dominates the conversation. I don't particularly find it helpful when those who have no personal stake in an issue, which affects me directly, take over the conversation, allies or not. And I simply will not read the parenthetical on the grounds of stupid dumbness and trivializing the matter. What I do find helpful is when stakeholders, that's women, mind you, since men apparently don't have a stake in abortion access, stakeholders are actively heard and supported. Abortion is an issue which affects women in the primary and our allies in the secondary. The primary voices are the ones who should get to dictate the terms of the conversation. So here is the position. Here the position is not necessarily that men should completely shut up, but that they are merely secondary and of minor importance. To be used only counter anti-choice men, whatever that entails, but not counter anti-choice women. So who will? Anyway, as well as shoring up the female speakers, by applauding on cue and calling, "You go, girl!" And men have no stake whatsoever in women having access to quality abortion services. No stake at all. Right. If you are the young son, say 3 years old, of a single woman who gets an unwanted pregnancy, and it becomes illegal to have an abortion, and thus she turns to a coat hanger and dies. You have no stake at all in her having had access to safe, quality abortion services, and having lived instead. No stake at all. It just doesn't affect you. Or if she's your wife, and she's forced to have the unwanted child and dies in childbirth, that doesn't affect you at all whatsoever. And why would it? You're not a stakeholder, right? You don't have shares in that corporation, and besides, you can't afford the dividends. Or if your dependent daughter is raped, and you don't really have a stake in what her options are at that point. You're secondary, of minor importance. Just ask McWright rhymes with wrong, father. He doesn't have a stake in his daughter's welfare either. Not if she is denied abortion services, nor if people say mean stuff to her. Not a stake at all. Not a stakeholder. Just ask him. perfectly reasonable, well thought out position that this is. And really, the struggle for abortion access involves all that it involves is a conversation. Just conversing with anti-women politicians and religious demagogues and well-financed anti-abortion propaganda campaign, a bit of chit-chat. You know. Not to mention the anti-activists surrounding women's clinics and harassing all those who enter or attempt to enter the clinic door, or even those simply trying to enter the building that has a door next to the women's clinic, as I've also witnessed. Though clearly male allies are allowed to be out front at those more dangerous, volatile instances, defending women trying to access the clinic, right? No talking is involved in escorting women through a hostile crowd of maybe hundreds of antis. But afterward, those men should just shut up about it, if they're still alive, and most are, anyway, because that's all those male allies are really good for. Well, that and just listening. So risk your life for me, but without the whole opening your mouth thing. Because see, the primaries, women, should dictate the terms of the conversation. Otherwise, men will take over those invasive, nasty, potential rapist male allies who we appreciate. And that was the most meaningful position taken in the beginning of that thread, the very beginning, on the subject by the Atheism Plus crowd. In this case, a moderator dictating the terms of the conversation. You know, femsplaining the matter. If only men would just shut up and listen to how they should just shut up and listen. Take dictation. But what stands out is, the most to me, is in moderator on a Mission 5's prescription for effective organizing in achieving a society where abortion is legal, safe, accessible, and of high quality, is this. She thinks that because she has female reproductive organs, and does that count for menopausal women, or transsexuals, or women who were simply born infertile, or sterile, or became that way? Or are those women secondary non-stakeholders too, since clearly abortion doesn't apply to them? So perhaps we'll just add the condition of having functional female reproductive organs, except during a certain portion of the menstruation cycle, of course. Anyway, On a Mission 5 says that she, and she says it in the first person, mind you, she herself should be treated as the one of major importance. 'Cause she is. She's of major importance. Don't just give her a seat at the table. Give that gal a throne. And she's to have her voice be dominant. That's her term. She prefers dominance. Who needs to be a good speaker? Who needs to have a correct analysis of the situation? Effectiveness? Irrelevant. Does Miss Universe really have to be smart, or a great leader, a sagacious, or comprehensive, or whatever? If you've got the functional reproductive organs, then you are of major importance, and by that alone, you should dominate the conversation. Well, so long as On a Mission 5 feels majorly important and dominant, surely those in opposition to abortion will tremble and fall to their knees and repent of their sins and beg her forgiveness, and waiting for her to speak, of course, when she does speak and tells them henceforth to stop interfering with a woman's access to abortion, in her majorly important words, they will listen, because, after all, she has functional reproductive organs. Yeah, but no. The world is not going to rearrange itself to cater to the egotism of a slightly less privileged Atheism Plus forum moderator, and the right-wing opposition to women will just laugh at the unnecessary bickering about bully pulpit territorialism spats that just such righteous so-called feminists would prefer to bring to the struggle for abortion access. And there's another little point in the rejection of my comments worth a mention. Note the full comment. Mansplaining is not welcome, especially not on a topic like this. Especially not on a topic like this. What does that mean either? Women are already too fragile to surrender their usurped discussion to hear criticism or correction of their unsilenced voices, but what? They're even more fragile when criticized or corrected about their usurpation of the discussion of abortion in particular? I wasn't even presenting my comment as a debate, just an entreaty. I genuinely wanted to positively affect the direction of that discussion away from stupid tactics and self-deluded triumphalism over the so-called privileged by the so-called underprivileged, due solely to having successfully shut up one's allies. Look, my allies have been shut up! We've won! The prominent goal articulated by these Atheism Plus theorists is how to edge men out of the struggle and elbow to the top of the alliance, not how to beat the anti-abortionists. That little side aspect wasn't so significant. I overestimated the management of Atheism Plus, even after I'd been hearing and reading about them, even at that early stage. I suppose I hadn't anticipated that a reasonable argument in their interest was to be granted no room whatsoever in the conversation happening there, dismissed so arbitrarily as it was and groomed out of what is stated. No, not, mind you, that no one liked the argument, or that it was largely ignored, or that there was a universal repugnance to the ideas I mentioned when they were presented. No, I mean, it can't even be presented in the first place. It is taboo talk, verboten. It is mansplaining. Suppress it quickly, for humanism, equality, and skepticism are unwelcome manliness at the door of Atheism Plus. The discussion arena where ideas fall or rise not by being contrasted against each other in an open forum, but by the arbitrary removal of those ideas deemed too difficult and harsh for sensitive and more egotistical ears. So offensive, in fact, that they can't even let it be seen, where if their arguments are so very important and dominant, they should have been able to argue it down handily, no? But that would be democracy, and would require them to think critically and present rational positions. And mind you, I may just have been asserting a correct position, shun the thought. Better to just suppress it entirely. What better way to be dominant and conspicuously important than simply silence any counter-arguments whatsoever? And I have little interest in attempting to participate further there, though I may try. But to get yet another asinine rejection. This time my error will be femme-defined towards some other absurdly worded rationalization due to the overwhelming oversensitivity to genuine intellectual and political rigor. The group, I won't pretend it's a movement, is wrongly oriented politically, and there's no point wading into that thicket of overbearing presumptuousness as an ally. The Atheism Plus crowd does not do feminism, does not do women any favors, any justice, any good by its cavalier, petulant, and overbearing approach demonstrated in that thread and in how they treated my comment. This little faction of petty, self-deluded, opportunistic, valley girl atheists simply now makes not just atheists look bad, but also every group is trying to suck into its ultimately vacuous plus agenda, including especially feminists. But also every group, yes, and I don't mean the explicit intent of Atheism Plus, which I can see every agreement with, but the effective one, the agenda actually being implemented. They make it really hard now for me to identify myself any longer as a feminist, even after a lifetime of unhesitantly considering myself one. At least if what they're doing really does qualify in any meaningful way as to what it is to be a feminist these days. And I'm certainly going to have to make a critical re-examination of my own conception of feminism now. Just like I was mistaken in presuming the best of the term mansplaining, I must now reconsider what this term feminism means. In any event, I won't be telling men they're mansplaining, much less trying to shut them up, when they present an argument stronger and more effective than a self-proclaimed feminist, Atheism Plus forum or no.
wasted and there's nothing to lose. Swap your confirmation for your dancing shoes, because there never was no God. Come out of the darkness and onto the streets. Forget about the fuss, let's have a carnival feast. Raise up your lowered head to hear the liberation beat, because there never was no God. And there is no